So hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Planning to Give is Thoughtful Planning. I'm Leanne Lang, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ottawa Heart Institute Foundation, and I am really excited to be hosting this interactive webinar once again. So November is Make a Will Month, and we thought this would be the perfect time to share and exchange information to help guide you through the process of leaving a legacy gift behind for your family, as well as the people and the charities that are close to your heart. We have a wonderful expert panel for you tonight. First, we have Carol Wills, who's not only a lawyer, and she's got a whole bunch of other degrees to go with that as well in her back pocket, but she is also the Director of Estate Planning for BMO Private Wealth. She helps individuals and families build a secure and purposeful legacy, as well as peace of mind with the context of their entire family wealth and their story. So she brings a wealth of knowledge with her tonight. I am also joined by our Director of Legacy Giving at the Foundation, Selva Trevor-Charman. She is integral. She's a critical component to the team at the Foundation, especially for the Legacy Giving program, as well as the personal endowment funds for the Heart Institute. And we also have a former high school teacher in the house with Arlene Hansel, whose husband Russell was actually a patient of the Institute for over 25 years. Arlene and Russell established an endowed fund for the Institute in their estate plan. She also, by the way, is a total firecracker and someone I think I would have loved having as a high school teacher for sure when I was in my high school years. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation that we're gonna have. And just really quickly, so we can cover the whole panel, I thought maybe it would be nice to know what you are hoping people will be able to take away from this webinar tonight. So Carol, I'll start with you.
Great, thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, Leanne. What I would like to do tonight is just help our guests understand that it is not only financially possible, but it's actually financially beneficial to be charitable. And I like to sort of talk about it with my own clients about, those charitable gifts are gifts that give back. And that's what I really want people to take away from tonight.
Perfect. Okay, I honestly, I'm excited about this conversation. Selva, from you and from the standpoint of where you're coming from.
Yeah, well, a lot like Carol, I think, we're really fortunate. We live in a really generous community that supports, charities, the Heart Institute. And it's a community that also has an interest in supporting through legacy gifts. So what I'm hoping they'll get from this tonight is exactly that it is possible. One of the biggest questions that Canadians do have today is, can I do both? Can I support a charity that I care about and still, make sure that my family is well cared for? And I'm hoping tonight will show you that yes, you can. You have the willpower to do both.
Yeah, we're going to talk about willpower in a second. And Arlene, I'm coming to you. As the teacher, I feel like I would have loved to learn from you. And what are you hoping people will learn from you tonight?
Well, a number of things, actually. First of all, I think Carol explaining all the estate planning aspect as well as sort of setting up charitable donations for the charities that you are wanting to be involved with. And also to hopefully have people become more aware of the Heart Institute and maybe what it does and the money that it needs, as every charity does. But there's new construction, all the equipment. The more people sort of make these charitable donations or set up funds that continue on and on, the better it will be for everyone and all of us and future generations living in this city and the area around it.
Perfect.
It's very, very close to my heart. It kept Russ alive for 28 years. And
it was special. And there's a reason, there's a real connection to the people and to the Heart Institute for sure. There's something that's different, Selva, because we did this last year and we had really interesting information, but something that's been new across Canada is this nationwide kind of campaign through Willpower. And I just wanted people to be introduced to Willpower because it's different, it's new, and it's really changing the conversation.
Yeah, so Willpower is a Canada nationwide movement, as you mentioned, to help Canadians understand exactly that they have the power to do both, support their favorite causes while still making sure that their family's taken well taken care of. That it doesn't have to be an either or situation, that in fact, as Carol mentioned earlier, one can help the other. So the Heart Institute has joined charities and professional advisors from across Canada, essentially to provide Canadians with the tools and the knowledge that they need to be able to create the legacy that they envision. And some of the ways that they're doing that is, for example, with events like the one that we're hosting tonight with experts like Carol, providing those tools. So that's willpower overall. And if you're interested in learning more, take a look at the website, willpower.ca. The Heart Institute is certainly really proud to be a part of that movement.
Yeah, I think it's really going to make a difference. And I think education, right, is for people to understand, and a place for people to go to be able to see where some of the answers, if they're not going to find them here on our webinar tonight, but we promise you'll get all the answers that you need. Okay, one of the first things I want to talk about, and just to set the record straight, and so people understand, Carol, I want right off the top, what is the difference with an estate plan and a will? And then I think from there we can break out the conversation.
I think that is a super place to start. And this is something that comes up in my work all the time. It's probably the most misunderstood part of doing this kind of planning. And I have clients who say to me all the time, Carol, my lawyer just did my wills, can you review them and tell me if they're okay? Tell me if they're appropriate. And I say, look, I can look at your wills, but the best I can tell you is whether all the words are spelled correctly and there's any grammatical errors, because I don't know if they're appropriate and okay, because I don't know what your estate plan is. So I like to, with my clients, I like to sort of explain in an analogy that your will is like a cake and your estate plan is the recipe to get the cake baked properly. So, we can eat a piece of cake and it tastes great, but we don't really know how it was made, what all the ingredients are, and what all the various steps were. So the estate plan is that. And it's really got three key components to it. So this is the context around deciding what goes in that will. So the first part of it is understanding your assets. So anybody who's doing estate planning needs to know what they own and how they own it, and if they've made beneficiary designations, and really get that. The second component is knowing their goals. What are their individual goals? Do they want to look after their family? Are there special needs in their family? And maybe there are community goals as well, and giving purpose to their wealth through some charitable giving planning. And then the third part of the recipe is expert assembly, is what I like to call it. So we don't want beginner chefs or do it yourself. We need really expert people who can take those understanding of assets and your goals and turn it into that will that works. So that's the difference between the estate plan, the recipe, and the will, which is the final result, the cake. It's just the, the combination of all that written down.
Okay, this is where the interactive part is going to come in, because you just gave us three fantastic points. Now I'm craving cake, by the way. I'm like chocolate and vanilla with a couple of sprinkles. But I want to get to the poll question, because you mentioned assets. So here's the poll question, and you can fill it out on the screen. Do all of your assets have to be included within your will? So this is the poll question that we have being listed. And so I'm going to be interested to see what people originally thought. So feel free to be able to go and fill out that poll question. Do all of your assets have to be included within your will? So this is when you have like the Jeopardy, da-na-na-na. So we'll figure that out. But let's just get right to it, and we'll see if people were right. So Carol, do they?
They do not. They do not. Now, there's a little difference between Ontario and Quebec, and I will explain what that is. There are, if you think of your estate as a bit of a bucket, and when you die, certain things will fall in that bucket. What is in that bucket is what your will can deal with. It's what your will can give away. So in Ontario, what goes in that bucket are all of the things we own personally, so not jointly and not where we've designated a beneficiary, but things we own personally go in that bucket. And that's what our will can give away. It's also what we pay probate on. So in Ontario, we do pay probate on everything that goes in there. So we have an incentive to move things out of that bucket and have things that are not part of our will or dealt with by our will. So, things like registered accounts, so those retirement funds and tax-free savings accounts, insurance policies, things we own jointly. In Quebec, it's a little bit different. they don't have the ability to separately designate assets outside their will. They have to, all the registered funds and so on have to be dealt with inside the will, and they don't have joint asset ownership with a right of survivorship like we do. So in Quebec, the answer is more, yes, everything kind of goes through your will, and your will is the one vehicle. But in Ontario, we have different ways to deal with our assets at death, and we have to make sure that we know what's going one place or the other.
Can I just ask you a quick question as you did that, just so that people understand the language? When you say probate, do we assume that everyone know exactly what? Because you hear that fancy word thrown around, but what is probate?
That's a great question. And it's also one of the most misunderstood things. So every province in Canada, with the exception of two, Manitoba and Quebec, charge a fee on your assets when you die that go in the bucket. Okay. So that fee is charged for the court to put a stamp on your will that verifies that this is the valid last will and testament of Leanne Lang. And that the executor that's named in there has the authority to deal with your assets. That's all that probate is. It's just a process of verifying your will. And for that, the provincial government charges a fee. In Ontario, it's 1.5% on everything that goes in that bucket. And that's why people are so anxious to get things out of the bucket in Ontario, because they don't want to pay 1.5%.
The government, money.
Always.
There's always something there. Now, Arlene, let me just ask you a question. Like, did you know going in and talking with your estate planner, like what you wanted to do? Like, were you coming in armed with knowledge, or, wanting, knowing what you wanted or how you wanted to make gifts done?
Not really. And that's kind of what I relied on the girl that I think before Salva that worked it out with me. I was kind of, just brain dead at that time anyway, because I think I set it up in 2004 and Russ died in 2002. So I didn't really know how it worked. I just knew that I wanted to do something to give to the Heart Institute on an ongoing basis as a kind of thank you, as well as let's help somebody else. In the end, we could save Russ, but if we can keep the process going for all the research and keep funding it, then other people will be saved on an ongoing basis. So I knew I wanted to do something, but I didn't know how, I didn't know where. And I actually talked to Russ's doctor, and he put me on to the foundation.
So it's interesting, right, as to some individuals, and this will go for any individual who's listening right now, because they'll all have kind of certain things that will tug at their hearts and what the plans are. And I think I appreciated Carol kind of saying, who are you taking care of first, and what is it that you're looking for? So Selva, do most people come to you with a clear indication? I mean, if they're coming to you, Selva, they know that they're connecting with the Heart Institute, but do they know exactly what it is that they're looking to do, or there's a lot of possibilities there also?
So yes and no, or both. So we do have a number of individuals who have already talked or had the conversation with their professional advisor, and that are coming to us essentially to have the conversation about how that gift, that ultimate gift, will be used. And that's the conversation that I love to have, because it allows us to share, the potential impact with them. And it's essentially gives them the opportunity to be a part of that gift, because essentially when we receive the gift, they won't really be here to be a part of that gift. So that's something we appreciate, that opportunity. And others are coming asking questions, as Arlene mentioned, was in her circumstance, and we're happy to assist and provide some knowledge on the different gift vehicles and the standard gift vehicles and the tax advantages. But we always refer them back to their professional advisor. The reason being is because their professional advisor is going to have the bigger picture, right? So if I can use an example, my husband and I, for example, have a pretty straightforward estate plan. So it's changed over the years, of course, pre-children, post-children. But then you have someone or a family like my parents, who have different investments and who are at a different stage of their lives, which makes a difference, right? And who have an adult dependent child living with them. their estate plan is a lot more involved, a lot more complicated, a lot more, it has to be a lot more precise. So everyone's estate plan is going to be different, and the professional advisor is going to be able to take even the knowledge that we give you from, or that I give you from the Heart Institute's perspective, and they're going to be able to apply to you to the best tax advantage for your overall estate. So I can kind of give you, I'm trying to see if I can use Carol's analogy. I can give you the ingredients to the recipe, and the professional advisor is going to help you put those ingredients together. Kind of thing.
The expert assembly. Yeah.
Exactly.
We're coming back to that. And so, Silva, you just mentioned, right? You brought up the word taxes. And so this is kind of, this gets the engine running. Carol, how do the tax advantages work when someone does make that charitable donation? And does the size of that matter?
Yes. So I think the best way to do this is to break it down into some little parts. I find that taking smaller bites of tax makes it more manageable to understand. So the first thing to know about making charitable donations is what the contribution limit is. You get a tax benefit up to a certain point, and after that you don't anymore. So when you're alive, that contribution limit is 75% of your annual net income. It's a lot. So, that gives you a lot of room. When you've passed away, it actually goes up to 100% of your net income in your year of death and 100% of your net income in the year before you die. So you get a little bit of extra contribution room at death. So that's the first part to know. Then the second part is just to sort of understand the mechanics of how giving a donation ends up in saving you taxes. So you can make a donation to charity. Let's take a round number of $1,000. So you make your donation. The charity gives you a donation receipt for $1,000. They give you a receipt for the full value of your gift. So now what do we do with that? How do we use that to reduce our taxes? Well, there's some tax formulas that get applied to this. These are the tax credits. So there's two components to it. There's a federal component, and that's the same for everyone across the country. But then there's also a provincial component. So all of our provincial income tax acts have charitable credit rates, and they all change. You can go online and find, CRA has a tax credit calculator, and lots of the charities do as well. You can go on and put your donation in, and it'll calculate what your credit will be. So it takes these federal and provincial tax credits, go into this little formula, and it calculates what the credit is. So under $200, the credits are a little bit lower, but both federally and provincially, when you donate more than $200, the credits go up. So on that $1,000 donation, for example, if you live in Ontario, it would be a credit of $361. So federal and provincial combined. If you live in Quebec, it would be like $464 or $5 in that range. So it's a little bit better in Quebec, because their provincial credit is a little bit higher. And when you get into the top tax bracket, if your income places you up at that top tax bracket of 53 or 54%, the government gives you a little bit of an extra incentive to give back to your community by giving you some extra credit. So all to say, the credit is a formula that you use against that donation receipt of $1,000 or whatever it is to determine how much you receive in a tax credit. So tax credit is something that you use now to reduce the amount of tax you have to pay. And at maximum, it's around 53%, generally, if that you're kind of in the top range. So when you ask if size makes a difference, it actually does. And you want to unlock those credits. So the more you give, the more credit you unlock in all of those, systems, the federal and the provincial. So each donation level has a higher credit amount up to a cap, but there is a limit on how much you can give in each year and have it usable. So as I said, it's a tax credit. It's not refundable. So what that means is that you can use your credit to eat away at tax you have to pay. But if you run out of tax that you have to pay, you can't use it anymore to get a refund for yourself. Okay, so that's as simple as I can make it. But I think, if we just understand those 4 or 5 little basic steps, I think people can get a sense of, the size of gift that they might want to make.
we've talked about the size of gift. What about the best time of the gift? Does that,
Okay.
So you got size and timing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So everyone probably notices, our guests notice that there's a lot of activity around charitable giving towards the end of the year. And the reason for that, I mean, from a charity's perspective, all year is a good time to receive a charitable donation. But from the donor's perspective, because you rely on that credit, to reimburse yourself for some taxes that you're going to pay, you want to reduce the time that you're out of pocket. So if you make your donation later in the year, November, December, then we all have to file for our taxes at the latest by April of next year, which is when we could trigger those tax credits for ourselves. So if we're out of pocket, we want to kind of shorten that gap between when the money leaves our wallet and when we can get that tax credit in. The other important thing about timing is that, if you're thinking about when is a good time, just in life to do it as well, is sometimes we have events in our life that trigger big tax bills. We sell a piece of property, maybe we sell the family cottage, or we sell some business shares or a piece of art, and we trigger a large tax event or capital gain. That's also a really good year to think about making a charitable donation to try and eat that tax bill down a little bit.
I appreciate this information, Carol. Arlene, were you aware of some of these things when you were deciding to make a charitable gift? Was this part of the thinking behind it?
I was aware of how, not in the detail that Carol just gave us, but I knew that you get a tax break, a little bit of a tax break when you give a charitable donation to something, but that was not part of my thinking as to why I did it at all. Sometimes it might be now, but it not as far as the Heart Institute's concerned, other charities, but no, all I thought about was I want to do something for the Heart Institute and for people coming after. But I did know about the tax break of a charity, but not in detail.
Not to this capacity, although we're learning about it now,
Yes.
and the definite benefits of it. I want to get to another poll question. Oh, by the way, the answer to that, I think we have a lot of people that are on board here, because a lot of people had said, I wrote it down to the answer, but a lot of people knew that you did not have to have everything, all of the assets, and I think we had around 67% and then 33% the other way. So hopefully we kind of got that out and really explained that well. To the next topic, and then we do have a poll question for this one. We're talking charitable gift vehicles and their advantages. Do charitable gifts have to be included within your will? So I want to be able to ask that question, and then we'll send that out into the poll. So again, do charitable gifts have to be included within your will? We'll wait on that, and I'll let people kind of take some time to go in through that. But Carol, I will come to you first on that one. So when you're talking about all the things that are being thrown into that bucket, what are you doing with the charitable gifts in kind of that process?
Right. So the ones, I think the easiest ones to start with are the ones that we do in our will. So if we want to give to charity, we have certain ways we can do it. We can make a lump sum gift. So we call those legacy gifts generally. So that's a set amount. So 50,000, 100,000, 10,000, whatever you want to do to a charity. And you specifically name the amount. The other way is to give a gift of residue. So residue is kind of that pot of gold that's left after all the bills are paid and the taxes are paid and any of those legacy gifts have gone out. And that's usually given away in percentages or shares or parts or something like that. So again, it depends on individual goals. People who give legacy gifts have sort of a set idea as to what they feel is sort of the value of what they want to give. People who leave residue percentages, they're prepared to sort of take a risk on what's going to be left in that pot at the end of the day that gets divided up amongst the charity and maybe other beneficiaries amongst their family and so on as well. So it will fluctuate, the amount in that residue pot.
Right, but I'm thinking of it, and I think is that you want to ensure that everyone is taken care of, that you've got children and grandchildren, and that all of the people that you want to have taken care of are taken care of. And then this is almost like the leftovers. Is that a little bit of how I would look at the residue a little bit? Is like once everything
The residue is
present?
the residue is the leftovers, but it's also going to be largely what you do leave to your family, because you generally people will it depends on your asset level and income level, but generally people will leave legacy gifts that they know are going to be proportionally smaller than their residue pot will be. There's always a risk, of course, that people don't change their will over the years and they eat away because of needs for care and all of those things, and that residue shrinks and shrinks and shrinks to the point where now the lump sum gifts are much greater proportion, and then sometimes we run into problems with families and challenging wills and things like that. So we'll talk about that later, about when you should revise wills and so on. But I think, I think you really want to look at what is the size of your overall wealth bucket, what's going in that bucket. And if you're using your will, is it best if you include charities as a fluctuating proportion of residue or a lump sum?
Okay, so you've talked about kind of the percentage and the residue. So outside the will, so within your estate, you also have gifted shares, you've got life insurance. It's like there's a lot of other things and a lot of different buckets that go with that. So
yes,
what are their advantages or what goes in with some of those?
Sure. So let's start with gifts of shares, because you can do this both during life. You can do it, as part of your estate as well, including through your will. You can leave a direction in your will that says, I'm giving, X share of my residue to charity, and I authorize my executor to make gifts of my appreciated securities. So the beauty of appreciated securities is that you kind of get an extra tax bump when you donate shares, publicly traded shares. So these are not private company shares; these are stock market traded shares. If they have a capital gain in them, and you or your executor takes the share and gives it to the charity, as opposed to selling the share and giving the money to the charity, by giving the share directly, you actually eliminate the capital gain to yourself or to your estate. So you save tax, but you get that donation receipt for the full value of that share, that appreciated share. Now you have that donation receipt, you're going to get your credit that you can use against other tax that you owe during your life or in your estate. So you get rid of some tax and you get a full donation receipt to pay other tax with. So that's the beauty of using shares. They do give you an extra tax bump. You mentioned life insurance. That's also a very popular tool for people with philanthropic goals. And there's a couple of ways actually to use life insurance to be able to benefit a charity. One is a very standard way where the individual owns the policy, they name the charity as the beneficiary, they make the premium payments over their life, but on their death, the proceeds of the insurance policy pay out to the charity. At that time, the estate will receive that donation receipt that the executor can now use for taxes owing at death. So that's one way to use life insurance. So the tax benefit for that comes at the end of life when the insurance pays out. The other way is to actually have the charity own the policy itself. So if the Heart Institute, for example, owned the policy, I make the premium payments, I get a little bit of a tax receipt up front when I set the policy up. And then each year when I make premium payments, I get a tax receipt for the amount of my premium payments. When I pass away, proceeds still go to the charity, but I've already received my tax benefit. I got my tax benefit during life. I don't get it again at death. So it just depends on what your goals are, what you feel you need in terms of planning with life insurance. But a good qualified insurance specialist can guide you through those options in a very, very capable way.
So Carol, just because I think Nancy Hansen is on, who I know has been a wonderful supporter of the Heart Institute, and I just want to make sure I answer her question, because once you started talking about life insurance, I was like, I think she had a question with this. So she says, I'm interested in finding out more information about setting up a life insurance policy to be made payable to the Heart Institute. Will I be able to have a separate policy for my family as well? Does that make
Absolutely.
sense? Okay.
Absolutely. So I think just what you would want to do is just make sure you've done some good financial planning. Know what the cash flow requirements are to support both policies, and make sure that you're comfortable with those cash flow obligations that you have. If the charity is going to own the policy and you receive those annual premium donation receipts, then you would definitely need a secondary policy for your family that you would own. On the other hand, if the charity is named, if you own the policy and the charity is named beneficiary, you could actually divide the proceeds of disposition of the policy at the end, X% to your family, X% to the charity, and your estate would get that percentage in a donation receipt at death. So if you own the policy, you can use a single policy. If the charity is going to own you, you would need to.
Okay, Nancy, I hope we were able to answer that for you and the family there. Outside, so are there advantages to doing one over the other? I mean, I know you listed a whole bunch of things. Do you have something? I mean, a lot of people, and when we're talking BMO private wealth, you know, you're dealing with clients that are coming from a lot of different backgrounds. Like, what are you typically suggesting as the expert opinion?
So that's a great question. And it goes back to that question we had at the very beginning about the difference between an estate plan and a will. Because I need to look at the client's financial structure to be able to answer that question. I need to know, do they have largely RSPs and tax-free savings accounts? Because if they do, that whole gift of appreciated securities really isn't going to work very well for them because they may not have non-registered appreciated securities. If they have large registered accounts, RIFs, LIFs, LIRAs, things like that, those kinds of things can be, you know, easily designated directly to a charity, which will help to offset a lot of the tax that those kinds of accounts trigger at death. So, you know, we put our before tax money into our RSPs, but eventually, you know, the tax man comes calling, and when we pass away, then everything that's left in our RSP or our RIF accounts comes into income in our year of death. So that can create a huge income tax bill in that final year. If we designate all or some of those registered accounts to a charity, we can offset a lot of the tax that is owing there. So again, I have to really look, it's all part of that recipe in the estate plan around the asset structure to see what makes sense for this particular individual. Somebody might have a really big pension income because they paid into their pension plan, but they might have small investments. For them, an insurance policy is a great option because they have cash flow to support that. You know, and they can decide, you know, whether they want to get that annual premium tax benefit or other way around. But so again, just depending on each person's individual situation is how we build that estate plan and build that recipe so we get really good cake at the end.
Yeah, it really is. Everyone's background, everyone's how they've saved throughout their lifetime. If it's been on a pension, if it's been through RSPs, I mean, it really does make a big difference as to how people are looking at this. And I know, Silva, you have these conversations all the time. Like, what do you see most often, you know, when you're kind of seeing it on the other end of the types of gifts that are coming in?
Yeah, most often we do see residual bequests. So as Carol was saying, a percentage of the remaining of the estate after debts, taxes, and other gifts funds to family members are distributed. And I think that one of the reasons we see that is for a lot of the reasons that were already mentioned tonight. It's essentially because that gives a lot of individuals the opportunity to ensure first their family's taken care of, and then they can go ahead and support, you know, the charities that they care about. If I can just add, I'm fascinated by the way that Carol answers the questions, because it really does highlight exactly what we were saying earlier about how it's important that a professional advisor help you out with this. Because even in my 20 years or almost 20 years at the Heart Institute, I still learn things listening to you. So I think it's great.
No, it is. I mean, and you're having these, you know, and your thoughts on, you know, on why you're seeing a lot of the residuals. So you see it, and you see it from the family's perspective, but you're right. There's always things to learn, and there's always kind of changes. And I think there's a lot of changes constantly within family dynamics, family structure. I know we got into, there's divorce, there's the complications, there's relationships. And so let's talk a little bit about that. We talked about the importance of having will and updating it regularly. You know, Arlene, how many times do you think you and Russell had the discussions, or were you updating? Like, was this something that was part of a conversation that you would be having, or how often, or once you were done, you forgot about it? How did you guys go about it?
Well, Russ certainly wasn't involved at all in what I did with the Heart Institute. I mean, we would update our wills. He had 2 children, so sort of stepchildren to me. So obviously he wanted money to go to them, to be sure. And so, I mean, we discussed and changed occasionally how the split would be, because a lot of it, I mean, he had to kind of trust me that I would divvy out and keep them in my will, because of course, once you die, you have no effect on what you can demand of anybody else later. So, you know, we had to, there was sort of a leap of faith there on his part too. But yeah, we changed our wills a lot, and what charities we would leave money to, and possibly how we would do it, but not really in any great detail. You know, it mostly has been up to me how to do it. And what
Like that, right? There was the trust factor and the leap of faith, and knowing that your loved one is taking care of the people and the individuals that you care for. And yet sometimes there is difficulty in family dynamics. And Carol, I'm sure you've seen this, you know, as well. So what are you looking at? How often should this be reviewed? Not just the wills, but to understanding the shift in assets, or, you know, lots of things that evolve and change, even once you've done it once or years later.
Yeah, exactly. And I always tell my clients, minimum, every 5 years, pull that will out of the drawer, have a look at it, and ask yourself the question, does this still reflect my current reality in terms of my asset structure and my goals? And if the answer is yes, then that's fine. Put it back in the drawer for another 5 years, unless something happens in the meantime. There's a significant life event, there's a death or a birth or something that might affect how you want to gift, or you have a big shift in your asset structure. You've divested a big asset, you've acquired a big asset, you've changed the way you own an asset. Those kinds of events should trigger a review, because again, the will is just the embodiment of that estate plan, assets, goals, and expert assembly. So, you know, again, if anything changes in that recipe, we need to make sure the cake still tastes okay.
Not having chocolate, we're going with vanilla or a combination.
Yeah. Banana cream.
Laughing because have you had this where you've had conversations with donors and you've had, you know, certain things, and then you realize things are evolving or changing?
Yeah, we have donors that, yes, absolutely, they've changed their will, and it is something that that we like, you know, something that we like to repeat. Absolutely, as Carol said, continue to revisit your estate plan, and when you're doing that, revisit your charitable gifts as well, because as Carol said, situations change, right? New births, deaths, new jobs. Loss of jobs. Like, I mean, what have we seen in the last 18 months with the circumstances, right? Things change. A lot has changed in the last 18 months. So, you know, you're going to find yourself from a charitable perspective, maybe, you know, you had plans to give a certain amount or a certain gift, and you might find that you've come to a point in your life when you're not able to do that. And charities understand that. We get it, you know, or I like to say you might have won the 649 or the Lotto Max, and you say, well, I'd like to give a little more to support my charity. So yeah, revisit your charitable giving plans. What's that quote? Life gets in the way when you're making plans, or something like that. Yeah. So make sure your plans are kind of following along with that.
No, it really does make sense. I have a couple of other questions that I want to get to that we were kind of considering, but I do want to, and I'm looking at the time, make sure that we've answered some of the questions from some of our participants as well. So Nadine, I'm going to get to your question right now, and this will be open panel, but she has asked, I would like to know the tax rules concerning a principal residence of the deceased. In particular, how to report for tax purposes the sale of the residence after several years have passed. The relative had a beneficial interest but not title in the property and lived there until their recent death. I understand that there have been recent tax changes regarding principal residences. Hopefully that didn't sound too complicated. Carol's nodding, so I'm thinking this is fine.
Yeah, it is a bit of a complex issue. And I mean, I do have to, you know, full disclosure, I'm not a tax accountant, right? So, so to have a full answer to this, I think you need to check with the accountant. What I can tell you is that a principal residence is still a tax exempt asset across Canada in every province. So our home, when we sell it or we pass away, there's no capital gains tax on our home, our principal residence. And I think this is where maybe the question's coming from, is there sometimes when we give someone else in our life, a partner or a child or something, what she referred to as a beneficial interest, which means it's basically held in a trust for the benefit of that person while they live there. At that point, CRA has recently taken the position that it's no longer a principal residence because it's not owned by a person. Okay, a trust is not a person. So if the trust is holding it and the original owner is out of the picture, they're deceased, it's no longer actually a principal residence. And so for that reason, from that time until the trust would end, it wouldn't capture that capital residence exemption. So there would be some capital appreciation that would be taxable in that home in the trust for that period.
It all comes down to the tax man, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And to get a real, I mean, I think to answer your question, to get a real answer about how you report that, that's really an accountant's question as to how to actually report that and what date to what date you have to include the capital appreciation would be your accountant to answer that. But that's the general principle of it.
Okay. And then another one, because we're talking about property, and this question came in from Albert. If a rental property is to donate, how is capital cost allowance treated?
So once again, I'm not a tax accountant, and this is this is a really complicated question, actually. And it's one that comes up a lot, and I always say you need to go talk to your accountant. So you can make donations, obviously, of capital property that you use to earn income, so rental property. Right. And when you do that, there's sort of a range that you can choose to sort of select that you are going to name as your donation amount. And again, it's a bit of a formula depending on where you choose in that range. There will be some of that capital cost allowance or depreciation recapture, meaning that CRA is going to say, well, we allowed you to depreciate it, but now you're going to get a benefit from giving it away because you're going to get that donation receipt and the tax credit. We're going to actually assess some recapture. It is a hugely complicated formula, and the elections that you make in terms of you know, what you want your actual donation amount to represent, because you can choose one of about 4 different values of the home. It will make a difference as to what the actual donation receipt will be and what your donation is. But again, that's really, I would encourage you to ask the tax accountant to determine exactly what that capital cost allowance recapture will look like. But there will be some, for sure.
Right. But it's interesting to see so many specialties when you have like a tax accountant. I mean, you're financial planning, but with legacy planning in one sense. You've got estate lawyers. Like there really are a number of different players, depending on the background that you're coming into this with, that really need to be able to answer and understand your individual situation. And then I had one more before I kind of get back to this, because Rowena just popped in here too. And I thought this was interesting as you were talking about pensions and RSPs, but can you designate pensions to charity?
No, you can't. You can.
It's a generous thought. It's a very generous thought, right? I have this. Okay, but
it is. Yeah, the Pension Act is set up so that there are only certain individual people who can be beneficiaries of pensions, largely spouses, sometimes children, but it needs to be an individual, and there's usually a next of kin relationship required. So, but those retirement funds like your RSP or your RIF, LIRA, LIF, those things definitely can be designated. If you're in Quebec, you have to use your will to designate them. In Ontario, you can make a direct designation on the account forms.
I appreciate that you keep bringing in the Quebec-Ontario thing, because Jennifer was saying if there was time, please differentiate the difference between what's happening in Ontario and Quebec. Okay, so I want to just get back to one more thing as we're still doing really good for time. Okay, should estate planning be something we start from a young age? And I know based on some of the people that I know registered, a lot of people are coming at this webinar tonight with very different states of life. At one time, finances was the conversation. So hold on a second. Today, should we be educating our youth about RSPs, listed securities, life insurance, charitable giving, estate planning? So I want to ask the panel, and not the panel, but all of our listeners and those that are watching, when did you actually start thinking about estate planning? When did you actually start thinking about estate planning? Some of us are behind the 8 ball. Some of us were kind of jumping in on it. I know when I first started working, and I got my first paycheck when I was working at what was it called back then? CHRO, before it became the new RO and all the other things. But my mom was like, there's $100 going from every one of your paychecks into the RSP. And I'm so grateful that I started at 22 and doing this. But, you know, when is the typical conversations that you're starting to have? When should they start? Carol, I'll start with you. And
You want to start with me? Okay.
Crystal, kind of give me some of those results. Yeah.
Sure. So that's really an interesting thing. And I would say COVID has been a wake-up call for all of us. Grandparents, parents, millennials, it's really brought into perspective, you know, the fact that we're all mortal and we need to have our things in order. So I guess if there's anything we can thank COVID for, it's that. But I would say, you know, a lot of people think, well, I don't really need to start estate planning until I have children. And that's very typical. Most couples don't even have wills until they might own a house, they might have investments, but they don't have a will until they get kids. And I would say that's too late. I think as soon as you have assets, you need to have a will, because without one, provincial legislation dictates how your assets get distributed. And that's, you know, nobody wants to substitute the government's judgment for their own. So as soon as you have assets, you should have a will. And, you know, it's one of those things, every family is different, and all of our guests are going to be experts on their own family, you know, and know their family best. But I do try to encourage clients as a family to have these discussions together, to talk about the role of different kinds of assets, talk about the role of insurance, talk about what you want to have done. What are your goals in your legacy? What are the needs? What are the expectations? Because the time to find out all of those things is now, not later when everybody just wants to, you know, punch each other in the nose about it. It's really better to start that conversation early, but not every family can. But if you feel you can, I think you should.
Yeah, and I'm going to go from the teacher's perspective. Arlene, you've had such influence on so many young children and the education behind them. Would this have been something you would like to see taught or discussed and part of the education process?
Definitely. I think it's really important because it's a life issue that everybody has to deal with at some point. And as Carol said, we're all mortal, and we're all generally going to work and have assets at a fairly young age compared to when we die. So I definitely think it should be taught in schools. There is some financial planning taught, but not to a great degree. I used to, when I taught accounting, there was a section sort of on finances and you know, doing your assets versus liability kind of thing to see, you know, make sure you're always above board. But and I used to throw in some ideas about wills and estate planning, the importance of starting a will and what a will is for, that kind of very generally to the kids, but at least you know, get them thinking about it and understanding what it is and explaining things like RRSPs and then also I was not thinking about RIFs and all that stuff at that time, but you know, at least getting them into the RSP idea and starting young and emphasizing that kind of thing. But I definitely think it should be taught in school.
Well, it's interesting when we see what the poll led us to. So a lot of people, only 20% had said that we should start thinking about this before 30, which I would think, as Carol had mentioned, as soon as you start getting assets. So only 20%. And then between 30 and 50, that was the 55%. So kind of like that's that good chunk. I would think you've got a home and maybe starting with kids. And then after 50 is 25%. So I think the bulk of people saw it between 30 and 50 as to kind of getting your life. And I would say Carol's kind of nodding her head as to when the discussion seems to be having. Do you have people that are coming to you really late in this discussion? Like so much life has come and then all of a sudden they're like, oh gosh, we haven't even started.
I do. And they're often very sheepish about it. And I say, look, don't be. There's no better time than now. Now is better than next week, next month, next year. Let's do it and let's plan it properly. So that we can get you set up and those goals that you have can do their job with the assets the way you own them. So let's figure it out. Yeah, I have people in their 60s and 70s who come to me sometimes with no wills. It's not that uncommon. I mean, that's why I love November is this Make a Will month. It sort of shines a light on this need. One of the recent surveys I saw is like barely 52 or 3% of Canadians actually have a will.
I saw that too. I was quite surprised. Yeah.
That's a pretty scary statistic.
Yeah.
It's shocking. Mm-hmm.
Although I would know some individuals who fall into that category, so and who seem to be educated and well versed. So I can see that there are some new tax rules that have come out. So I just want to get to that as I'm looking at the time and check out the questions. Carol, how soon can my executor make the charitable donation after one's death?
So there's no real time limit. The only thing that can sometimes be a bit of a delay is in provinces like Ontario with probate. You often need to wait, until the estate has received probate. You can't start giving assets away until you have that. So sometimes there's a delay. In Quebec, there is no probate, so things can happen a lot faster there. So, it doesn't really matter, as soon as possible, I guess, so that, the donation receipt can come in and taxes can start getting prepared for the estate, for sure.
Okay. And I think people are coming with really generous hearts here, but what if I don't have enough income for my donation to make a difference in the year that I passed away?
Yeah, that is a great question. And the new tax rules that you just mentioned actually have really helped with that. So I'll give you what the old rules were, which ended in 2015. In January 2016, we got new tax rules around charitable donations, and they've made everything so much more flexible. So it used to be that if you wanted to make a charitable donation, you made it in your estate, or you made a beneficiary designation, and it was valued the day before you died. So you pass away, and then for valuation purposes, the value of those shares or your RSP or whatever it was taken the day prior to death, and it was fixed in that time. And then the executor could only use the donation receipt for the deceased person's personal return for their last year of life or the year before. So it was very limited. Now, under the new rules, if there's a gift made, the executor has a 5-year span that they can actually make this gift. So the gift itself is not valued until it's actually received by the charity now. So there might be a little bit of strategizing in terms of, if the market's on a little bit of an upswing and we want to get the biggest, bump we can, maybe we wait a few months and we give those appreciated securities 3 or 4 months from now and we get a better tax result. So now there's flexibility for the executor. So it's valued when the charity receives it now, and the executor can still use it for those 2 years of the deceased person, so year of death or year before, and 3 years out into the estate. So the estate will continue to earn some income as assets sit there waiting to be, administered. It takes a long time. It's usually 18 to 24 months minimum to administer an estate, and assets sit there, not idle. They sit there earning some income, dividends, capital growth, etc. So it will continue to earn income and has to file a tax return every year that the estate is open. So the executor now has that 3-year window also out into the estate to be able to slice and dice that donation among all 5 of those years.
You've talked a lot about the executor. That's a big responsibility. of being
Yes.
designated as someone's executor, like I'm
Yes.
listening, and this isn't just it happens and the next week you kind of divvy things up. This is, you're talking 18 months to 2 years. This is a long process of, if it's not a family member, if it's an executor, of dealing with a family who may be dealing with loss, who's grieving, who there's a lot that's involved in that. So this wasn't part of the plan, but choosing the executor, there's a lot of background that probably goes into that.
Yes, there should be. There should be, and often, sadly, we sort of, I think we still suffer a little bit from old-fashioned thinking when it comes to choosing executor. It's an honor, oldest child, whatever, it's not an honor. It's a nightmare a lot of times. There's a saying in my world, okay, we have a lot of Black humor in the estate planning world, but there's a saying that says, if you want to get even with someone, make them your executor. And so
I'm expecting that answer.
And it's because there's so much heavy lifting. It's entirely personal liability. So if anything goes wrong, you are personally liable to the beneficiaries to make it right out of your own pocket, not out of the estate asset. So you miss a tax filing, something's gone wrong, an asset depreciates that you could have prevented. It's personal liability. So your choice of executor is really, really, really important. And estates don't look like they used to. 40, 50, 60 years ago, estates were simpler. There was maybe a house, a few bank accounts, some GICs. Now families don't look the same. Families are more complex. Investments are more complex and international and securitized. And beneficiaries are very informed, and frankly, in our generation, also very debt laden, and they're motivated to make sure that the executor is doing everything by the book. So, there's a lot of reasons why being an executor is a difficult task, and they just keep getting more difficult. Cryptocurrency, I don't ever want to be anyone's executor that has cryptocurrency. Because I will make a mistake.
Yeah, there's so many layers. We had talked a little bit, and I'm just going to put this in for time because I know Karen has sent us 2 messages, because I know we had talked about Danielle Robinson joining BMO and talking about setting up family foundations. So there's a complicated layered thing, but I didn't want Karen to think that I was ignoring your question, but it was like, how is a foundation set up and what are the pros and cons of a foundation? There are actually people now that are working on helping families who may have, who are looking to kind of grow that in setting up a family foundation. There are, and financial institutions like BMO, Private Wealth, we have philanthropy specialists like her who will help sit down with families and understand those goals, what they want to accomplish with their foundation. They'll help them actually put together all of the proposal and paperwork for CRA, because CRA has to approve your foundation. It's not something you can do overnight. It takes the better part of a year to set up a foundation. It can be set up as a corporation and have a board of directors, or it can be set up as a trust and have trustees. So first of all, you need to choose your structure, and then you put together your proposal, you send it to CRA, you get approved, you get your number from CRA, and then you can start funding your foundation and accepting requests for grants. And each year you have to grant out, currently the rate is 3.5% of the value of your invested funds. And so you have to actually show that you're giving it away. It's not
you have to show you're giving it away, and you have to entertain grant proposals and accept or deny grant proposals. So there's a lot of work involved. So financial institutions have philanthropy specialists like we do to work with families and help them through the process, not just setting up, but also that annual administration process and reporting. That's an integral part of running a family foundation. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do, to bring your family values, to give purpose to your wealth, and to involve, the next generation so that they see those philanthropic values and giving back into the community, for sure. But it's something that, you need to go into with your eyes open, knowing that there's a considerable amount of work and cost to set it up, and then annual administration required each year, including after you die, because your foundation doesn't die with you. Your foundation continues to carry on and needs to make its grants and receive, its funds and so on. So, you want to make sure that the next generation is actually on board with that.
And you talk about kind of seeing things and happening year to year. And so, Selva, I want to just quickly hit on it. I'm looking at the time as we're hitting the 8 o'clock hour. It is to understand what has been happening or keep up with things, because there are families and there's endowed funds and there's the fund like Arlene has, where there's a plan for it. There's a legacy gift. How will this money be used? Where is it going to go? And to be able to honor and to be able to still have those funds going where that donor or where that person or that family wanted things to go. And that's important for you, and that communication back and forth with these families.
Yeah, it's really important. We absolutely want to make sure that we're always respecting the donor's wishes. To be honest, from any foundation's perspective, from any charity's perspective, not only gifts made through their estate, but their lifetime gifts as well, where they'd like to direct their giving. The only thing we do is that we recommend when we're having the conversation with donors is try and make sure that you have a clause in your estate plans and your will, just in the event that when your gift does come in, that we can still direct it to the area that you were hoping to support, because maybe a certain department no longer exists. So you want to have a clause to be able to redirect those funds as closely as possible where you wanted them to go, in case that area no longer exists. And in the event that we receive gifts where there is no specific area identified, or where if that area is no longer, in existence, then we generally direct the gifts to the priorities of the Heart Institute. And the priorities of the Heart Institute change and evolve depending on the cardiovascular needs of our community. So it's always going to support the greater need of the Heart Institute, patients of the Heart Institute. So, yeah.
And that's what we found. Arlene's nodding, and she feels good. I mean, this is about, I know how important it was for you to feel like Russell was making an impact too with this gift, Arlene, and you talk about him being a patient for so long. Is there a sense of just familiarity and family, and that you feel good at the end of the day of knowing where your funds have gone?
Oh, definitely. Russ had heart failure in the end and was on the transplant list, but it never came. So that's where I directed my funds to heart failure and transplant. Yeah, it's a really good feeling. And when I pick up the phone to call Selva every year, we have a conversation and catch up, and it's nice. I mean, the Heart Institute feels very close to me and feels very personal. And, I think that's important too, when it makes you want to give more. It makes you want to keep dealing with them, and you feel good about doing it for sure.
Well, it's been wonderful to have you on this, and to have met you and to heard your story. So Arlene, we really do appreciate it. And I know that there's other people that are on this call that feel incredibly close and are very passionate about the work that is being done at the Heart Institute. Carol, your information was like, I feel like I was like, my brain was like trying to soak in like a sponge as much of it as possible. And Selva, I know with all of this, there's an opportunity to learn more. So people will be getting some kind of, there's presents coming from you at the end of this.
Yeah. So we're going to be following up. First of all, thanks to everyone who joined. Thank you so much to Arlene and to Carol and our panel, and to our fearless leader, Leanne, for doing such a great job at, hosting this event. We are going to be sending you an email in the next day or two, which will follow up. It's just a document that will help you with some of the things that we talked about today, the different gift vehicles and whatnot, and what sort of conversations or what sort of questions you might want to keep in mind when talking to your advisors and planning your estates.
This is perfect. And this is a great initiative too, as willpower continues to grow. These are kind of the questions that they realize people are going to be having. Carol, I'm really anxious to kind of get a cake baked from you with all of the different things thrown in there, but really appreciate your expertise and some really great information. So really appreciate it. I think I got to all of the questions that were listed. So I'm really hoping that we were able to answer those for all of the viewers that were watching tonight. And thank you so much for just for signing up and for listening and for being part of the Heart Institute family. And this was wonderful. So it's like a show, and it's like I can't even say we'll see you tomorrow, but it's been great to have everyone here. And thanks once again to our panel. There was some great information by all. Arlene, wishing you good health, and I guess as we're heading into the holiday season, good luck, everybody. Good luck trying to find your presents with all of the shortages and everything else that's been happening. But wishing you all the best, and have a great rest of the night. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.